Our dear friends, we're going to invite our following speaker, Sergey Roshchupkin. Sergey graduated from the University of Saint Petersburg of Polytechnics. In 1983, he also graduated from the Faculty of Theoretical Nuclear Physics. He worked at the Federal Nuclear Center of Russia. Since 2015, Sergey Roshchupkin is a professor of the Faculty of Theoretical Physics in Saint Petersburg Polytechnic University of Peter the Great. He also worked a lot with the topic of laser emanation with a substance, and he is the author of over 230 scientific works. He worked on the modern ideas of the quantum physics, of the laws of the world, and so on and so forth. He wrote many articles on that. He's been studying the works of H.P. Blavatsky, Elena Rorik, Daniel Andreev, Uspensky, and others. Please welcome Sergey Roshchupkin, Doctor of Physical and Mathematical Sciences, Professor of the High School of Engineering and Physics of St. Petersburg Polytechnic University after Peter the Great. And Sergey is going to present us his presentation on the concept of time in modern science and theosophy. Good afternoon, dear friends. It is my pleasure and my honor to be here on the stage. It is the second year in a row that I participate in the Congress. The topic of my presentation is quite unusual. It is quite complex because I wanted to give you an overview of everything that we know about the concept, the issue of time. The concept of time is one of the most complex terms in modern physics. And regardless of the fact that since Newton's time this definition has changed, we can say that it has undergone more quantitative than qualitative changes. That problem still remains a mystery. In physics, time is still a parameter, an external parameter that appears out of nowhere. That's a huge, huge issue. To start with, I would like to talk about the definition of time that I managed to find in the Secret Doctrine, written by HPB. HPB says that there was a period where, quotation, time was not. So in stanza 1, we can read, "The eternal parent, wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration." Duration, without having a beginning or an end, is a perfect abstraction that contains time. The manifestation of time occurs with Manvantara, bearing those huge periods of time present in HPB's book. 1 day of Brahma is 4,320,000,000 years. I also calculated that in seconds, because in physics, in theoretical physics, we normally use seconds. So it's 10 raised to 17th power seconds. So we have 1 day of Brahma, 1 day night of Brahma, and respectively 1 year of Brahma. Here we also have Mahakalpa. And the largest period that can be seen is the age of Brahma, and you can see those huge numbers on the slide. Theoretically, the modern physics is not aware of such periods of time. And according to our knowledge, we have only gone through 14 billion years, and here you can see trillions of years. These periods are striking to our mind. I would like to speak about the fourth universal principle, Vorhat, the serpentary, the sevenfold phenomenon, and different types of matter. And then I would like to try and show you that the power and the forces of Vorhat are deeply linked with the cycle of time. And this is the reflection of the properties of time. It is very important to emphasize that. I think that ancient civilizations were much more ahead of us than we are in understanding this active element of all the processes running on the metaphysical and physical levels. And this knowledge was reflected in calendars that in their turn reflected those periods. But in order to make this abstract knowledge understandable, those numbers were linked with different properties of different animals, such as the hare, the snake, the boar. And they also involved different elements, such as the properties of the earth. There were multiple calendars existing in the ancient world. For example, you should perfectly know the Chinese calendar, the lunar calendar that is based on the 12-year rotation period of Jupiter. And therefore, the full cycle is 60 years old, the one that is coming to an end. The Zoroastrian calendar, which is based on the rotation of Saturn's rotation period that lasts for 32 years. Svarog calendar, this is the ancient Slavic calendar that is based on the period of the precession of the Earth's axis of rotation, which lasts for 25,920 years. This calendar had been used up until the 1st of December 1700. So our ancestors knew those periods and they could adapt to them. Unfortunately, the European civilization destroyed all of that. It is essential to mention the works of the Russian esoteric school of Theosophy, named after HPB under the leadership of Bakhanov. Based on HPB's works and the works of Elena Roerich, the Kala Chakra of Theosophy was created. Roslev's book Eternity, Time of the Gods gave a detailed analysis of this Kala Chakra. I'm not going to talk in more detail about Kala Chakra now because I have to admit that I do not have a deep understanding of it just yet, and it requires a very, very deep investigation and study. And we cannot but mention the work performed by Vilena Delikova-Parfenovich, who took up that huge work to translate and interpret the ancient Indo-Tibetan cosmological system of knowledge in her book of Kala Chakra and Kala Chakra Tantra. And my little overview of the theosophical idea of time would not be complete if I didn't mention the mystics who have this mystical experience of traveling around different worlds, which is equal to the experience that is being collected over thousands and hundreds of years, and then the conclusions are made, and then we have access to those conclusions. I would like to mention one of the mystics of the 20th century who basically acquired the practical skills, and this is Carlos Castaneda. So he got to study the mystical knowledge to one of the heirs of the most ancient knowledge of the Toltecs, the descendants of the Atlanteans. As a result, Castaneda repeatedly visited parallel worlds that differ from our world in the number of dimensions of time and space. And we should, of course, pay proper attention to Daniil Andreev, one of very well-known Russian writers. So in his tremendous work, The Rise of the World, he described in every detail different planes of the Earth. He noted that Shadhanakar consists of 242 different worlds. So Shadhanakar is actually the Brahmaputra name. So Shadhanakar is the name that he gives to the Brahmaputra of the Earth. So Daniil Andreev says that there are levels where the number of dimensions of space varies from 1 to 6 and time from 0 to 236. It's a very interesting piece of information. And now I would like to move on to what the science knows today. The most complete idea of time first appeared with works of Isaac Newton. It was him who introduced the definition of absolute space and time. So this is something that is understood as absolute, independent of matter and physical processes. At the same time, space was assumed to be homogeneous and isotropic. There are no events, no processes running there. There is no matter. It's really absolute. Whereas time was described as processes that have a certain duration that never changes. Given the fact that, in addition to his works on natural science, Isaac Newton had a large number of works on mystics, on occultism, we can assume that the ideas of abstract time and space was understood by him based on the esoteric works that he studied. That's why his concepts of absolute space and absolute time are very close to that primary basis for the study of all physical processes and the idea that is used in Theosophy. Newton was a very interesting person. His works on esoterics have been kept secret for a long time. They are kept in the British Library, but they were concealed not to compromise Isaac Newton. He was a remarkable person, and there is lots and lots of things to reveal and to investigate by the following generations. At the beginning of the 20th century, Albert Einstein first showed us and demonstrated that time and space are interdependent, and they form a single space-time or four-dimensional Minkowski world. Minkowski was a German mathematician who generalized all those concepts. However, in Minkowski's work, in Minkowski's understanding, time and space are different from each other. The coordinates are real and the time is not. We understand that time is qualitatively different, and it's like an alien in our world. Space and time stopped being independent, and they depend on the speed. The flow of time, depends on the speed of the body. The greater the speed, the slower time flows. So objects move with different speeds, and speed has to be more or less close to the speed of light. That's why in our world of low speeds, we cannot mention that. We cannot notice that. We cannot grasp that. And Einstein also showed that time can flow differently depending on the gravitational field. The bigger it is, the slower the time flows. So the greater the speed, the slower the time flows, like it was said earlier. This was the most thing done by Albert Einstein. However, Einstein did not respond to the question, what is the time? And nobody can answer that question today either. Now, on the slide that you can see now, you can see a woman, a unique woman, whose name was Emma Noether, a German lady. It's a diamond in the theoretical physics that appeared in the science. It is indeed a diamond. In 1918, at a seminar of the Göttingen Mathematical Society, she made a speech. She made a presentation, and that presentation just turned the world around. She was the first one to realize that such properties as homogeneousness of time and space are not any different from each other. And so these simple properties that we have were used to formulate the law, a conservation law, energy conservation law, that comes from the homogeneousness of the time. So Emmy Noether was the first one to prove this theorem, and this result, along with the subsequent major works on abstract algebra, deservedly allows many to consider her to the greatest woman in the history of mathematics. So if there is a uniform flow of time, then the energy is conserved. If the time does not flow uniformly, then it is not conserved. We do have examples in the world when the time does not flow in a uniform way. It is just not possible. And energy has important powers which is related to different cycles, to different differentiations. I need to point out a very important thing here. I mentioned that Emma Noether showed that the time bears energy. In quantum physics, we can find the direct link, that formula that you can see on the screen, E equals h omega. Each particle corresponds to a de Broglie wave. That is, the particle is characterized by a certain frequency, and this frequency is directly related to the energy of quantum particle. That's why this formula that you can see on the screen displays that in the quantum world, this link between the energy and the time can be seen, can be noticed right away. That's a fundamental fact that we're going to get back to at the end of the presentation. So now let's speak a little bit about how we measure the time. Since antiquity, time was determined by observing stars from midday to midnight, and from midday to midday, and 1 second was equal to 1/86,400 of the average solar day. That's 1 second, and that's an very average value. It is very imprecise. In 1967, the International System of SM, System of Units of Measurement, defined 1 second as 9,192,631,770 periods of electromagnetic radiation, corresponding to the transition between two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the cesium-133 atom. Those details do not matter now. what is important here is the frequency which is very stable. And the accuracy of a nuclear clock amounts to 10 raised to minus 9 power of a second. But we need to remember that the atomic clock, and the atomic clock on the Earth and on the satellite, or the satellite that rotates around the Earth, move in a different way. The atomic clock on a satellite moves with a different speed, with a slower speed than on the Earth. And the situation is also very different. And all the particularities, the specificity of the atomic clock on a satellite is also very different. And what do you think can accurately determine the position of any object on Earth? Of course, it is the GPS system. The deviation is very tiny, but if we did not take them into consideration, we would never be able to determine that position of objects. When people say that this is an abstract theory that doesn't really have any impact on the reality, you should remember that many things existing on the Earth really depend on those concepts, on those discoveries. Otherwise, the humanity would have never advanced so much as it has. Now I'd like to show you this little diagram of the time of the existence of the universe on the physical plane. So here you can see the Big Bang, and then you can see this formula 10 raised to minus 43 power. And we cannot really say anything about that because the modern contemporary physics is not capable of knowing what happened in that period between 0 and 10 raised to minus 43 power. So we can only give the overview, the whole image of the development of the universe, starting much later. And that's how we see that first there was substance, so matter, then the stars, then the galaxy. Approximately 14 billion years back. I would like to emphasize that these numbers are much lower than the numbers that we encounter in the secret doctrine. And here you can see our galaxy, or the Milky Way. It can be seen that the size of our galaxy is approximately 100,000 light years. And our solar system is located about 28,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. This is the location of our solar system from the center. And it rotates, the solar system rotates around the center of the galaxy. That cycle takes about 250 million years. We also need to take those cycles into consideration while doing research. So now, very briefly, the planets of the solar system, so nothing is going to be new for you, we can move on. Now we're going to tackle the most critical, the most essential issue of causality. As you can see on the screen, there is no differentiation between the past and the present. The question of the arrow of time was raised by many scientists, Leibniz, Descartes, Mach, Einstein, and this issue still remains unresolved. Quantum physics also varies in its interpretation of that. There is no causality in modern physics, so to speak. There is a very drastic contrast between the living world. It's an enormous, a tremendous issue. But this fact contradicts our experience. It doesn't mean that the scientists are not trying to tackle that issue. There is a huge inadequacy of the world of the exact sciences and the real world in which we live. The portrait that you can see on the screen depicts Nikolai Kozyrev, the Soviet astrophysicist who tried to resolve the problem of causality in physics by increasing the dimension of time. What he tried to do, he tried to introduce causality in physics. He said that the time has the second component, which is linked to the cause, to the causality. He also linked that to the asymmetry of the world. In our world, we should differentiate between the left and the right. There is no symmetry between the two. Sometimes we say that a person is symmetrical, but this is not true, because the right side and the left side are always different. So due to that asymmetry, the planets, the southern hemisphere, is longer, is more stretched than the other one. And due to that property, that property of the hemisphere, it changes the way we perceive them. Just like different molecules of DNA, for example, they have different structure. So the world establishes it's not being symmetrical. So it is an active component of participation in all processes in our life. Obviously, I could not but mention the person who's very little known because he was working in confidential labs and secret labs in the Soviet Union. There's Robert Bartini, an aristocrat of Italian origin, a communist, who fled from Italy for the USSR, and he spent the majority of his life in the Soviet Union. And at the end of his life, he wrote Russian in the field nationality. Just imagine, he was a brilliant scientist because after the war, he created the design of a reactive jet, whose the speed of which was so much higher than the general speed of the airplanes of that time. He also worked with cosmology. In 1965, he published his article "Relation Between Physical Quantities" in the journal Reports of the Academy of Sciences. So what he did, he created a six-dimensional world by Bartini with different coordinates. But his works are very complicated, they're hard to understand. When he was dying, in his testament, he said that we should put his works in an iron box and only open it much later, because now it is way too early and we're not capable of understanding that. Speaking of external time and internal time, we can say that external time is a physical time that is associated with the cycles of motion. What is the internal time? The discovery of quantum mechanics through physics at the beginning of the 20th century led to fundamentally new results related to the energy of quantum systems. We can say that quantum physics has opened the veil of new properties of time. For example, quantum mechanics has shown that at absolute zero temperatures, minus 273 degrees Celsius, where all thermal vibrations of atoms and molecules stop, the so-called zero vibrations of particle nevertheless remain. So the nature of zero vibrations of quantum particles is related to the interaction with virtual vacuum particles. How is all that possible? That's because we do come in touch with the world of virtual particles. That's those particles that create those zero fluctuations. And that's a system of worlds that are located one in the other, something that really works in the Theosophy, and that's something that we came across in quantum physics. And the last thing that I would like to say today, of course, it is nothing more than a hypothesis, but I would like to propose that hypothesis to try and describe the causality of time and space. So there is a little image that I drew where I have the surface of the present. And then we have time that we know. So it flows from the past to the present as we think nowadays. And I will try and explain why this is the flow. But sometimes this flow can be reversed, and sometimes it can flow towards the past. Before I spoke that modern quantum physics describes the interaction between particles. And the particle is, this is due to the fact that these transitions are apparently caused by virtual particles that are located in the nearest to a physical world plane. Because of this, the transitions between quantum states are statistical in nature and are described by probabilistic laws. So we can say that there is the surface and there are two axes, and this can be called the axis of virtual time, the plane of the present. So in that flat surface, there is an interaction that occurs with the speed that is higher than the speed of the light, and that speed can be indefinite, can be endless. So the plane of the present consists of huge amount of events that can impact, that can influence our life, the life of our planet, of our universe, of our society. And there are many parameters that can play a part in that. As you can see, there are green parameters and red parameters, and they point in different directions. And the interaction between them destroys some of the phenomena. And one of them are more impactful and some of them are less impactful. And this is something that gives us the direction or the causality of the present time. To conclude, I would like to say that these matters, these issues do require a solution. It would be wonderful if Theosophy explained the concept of time in a more detailed way. Unfortunately, I have not succeeded in doing that yet. But we can see that the quantum physics leads us to the answer to the question how the causality appears. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. While Sergey was speaking, I had an idea. Our next Congress can be dedicated to the space and time. We can only speak about that subject during the whole progress because the most important hypotheses were presented just now. And I wouldn't say that the hypotheses, those are topic subjects that require more detailed investigation and study. So when we say that nobody described the time, nobody gave a definition of time, we should not forget the secret doctrine. And we shouldn't complain that the physics is dead, it is alive. And this is something that you demonstrated us just now. And it is a fact, because now the time delegated this energy that flew through you. And I think that everyone who is present in this hall now could feel that. And even I have goosebumps now. I had a few questions during your presentation, but I will have to hold back and just ask one of them. Does the time exist without space? Daniel Andreev said yes. What does Sergei Roshchupkin think? I don't know. Does space exist without time? I don't think so. Does in this share, this value, in the share of a second, so is it possible that they can merge together at some point of a second, at a millisecond? Can science say that they can exist simultaneously at a millisecond? Well, in my opinion, the space and time are fundamentally different concepts. And I think that the basis of everything is this space. Thank you so much. Today, during our roundtable discussion, we are going to discuss that. And of course, we're going to touch upon that matter too. We have a few comments, Sergey. What you've been saying about the physics, that's true, there is no arrow of time. But what can you say about the idea of Ilya Prigozhin, who found in live matter, in live substance, processes with entropy that, are not possible in the live nature? So actually, the arrow of time exists in large systems, and there is statistical properties and the law of entropy, of the increase of entropy. But my dear friends, that law only works in closed systems. But our world is not a closed system. It is not closed at all. So we cannot say that that law of the increase of entropy can be applied is just fundamentally wrong. Yes, Prigozhin is correct about the living beings, but I was speaking about the fundamental initial equations of theoretical physics that are the source of everything, but the arrow of time is linked to statistical properties, and this is a little bit different. I would like to thank Sergei Roshchupkin for his wonderful presentation, for his passionate, unique attitude to theosophy, physics, to the world, to people, something that's very rare. Thanks a lot. And I would like to give you this work of different presentations that are presented, that are documented in that magazine, in that journal. And there is also the collection of theosophical works here. It exists in English and in Russian. It was published by Albatross Publishing House. It also includes your presentation, your article. Thank you so much for your collaboration, for your ideas.